Thank you for coming. I'm Simon Rosenberg from NDN and also from our affiliate, the New Politics Institute, which has been an organization looking at changes in media and demography and how they were creating what we call a new politics. And for the last several years, NDN has been, and its organizations have been making a big argument to the public that there were three big changes going on in the life of the nation that were birthing what we call the new politics. They were the development of a new governing agenda that were changing, that was obviously setting a new course for the country and for the world, that we were going to have to, for progressives to succeed in the 21st century the way they did in the 20th, that they would have to develop a new argument and a new governing agenda that met the challenges of today. We've also seen huge changes in media and technology that are fundamentally changing the way that we communicate and advocate and organize our politics and our government. And third is that the demography of the country is changing. We're not going to get into that too much today, but I think we're going through what may be the most profound demographic transformation in our history since the arrival of the Europeans here on this soil in the 15th and 16th century. And that we believe that taken together that these three big changes, new governing agenda, the new media technology, the new people of the 21st century, we're creating what we've been calling a new politics. And I think that when you reflect upon what's happened in the last few years, the greatest example of that is the remarkable and inspiring Obama campaign and how they really understood, I think, and built an entire argument and campaign around these vast changes that are going on here in the United States, but also all around the world. I mean, many of the things we're talking about today are universally applicable, as we will be seeing probably in the lifetime of this presidency, particularly as we all hope Barack makes it through 8 years, that essentially all the world will become connected in some point in the next 5 to 10 years. Largely it will be probably mobile devices as opposed to what we consider to be the traditional internet in the United States, the way that we think about this. And that I think the exciting moment, and one of the reasons I'm so excited about this event today, is that I think for everything that we have seen, we're really just at the beginning. That the velocity of change is increasing in many ways with the media and technology environment that we're in, and that we are going to hit, I think humanity is going to hit a key tipping point at some point in the next 5 to 10 years where we will be all connected as never before. And that, that if you want to think of it as sort of the printing press on steroids, or I guess steroids are not cool these days, but printing press on, my kids actually know about it, so I know it's not cool. But we're seeing where if the printing press was a way of democratizing knowledge that allowed average everyday people to access wisdom and knowledge in a way they hadn't before, I think when the world is all interconnected as never before, I think we really are going to see, I think, this huge change in sort of who we are as a people. That's going to be happening very soon, right? That's going to happen hopefully in the first term of Obama, but certainly in the second term. So with us today is somebody who has pioneered and thought about all of this and executed and managed and pulled about. For those of us who talk about this every day, there's somebody who I think that we all look to as the guy who really put it all together and helped manage what was a team effort. And I know the Obama people are very good at saying this. It was lots of people that were involved in bringing about this magical campaign and the way the internet was able to harness the passion and power of millions and millions of people. But there was one guy in charge of the new media effort for the Obama campaign, Joe Rospars, who's with us today. And I, for one, am very excited that he's here. Joe, thank you for taking the time. I know how busy you are. All of you know that Joe is one of the folks who runs Blue State Digital, which is really one of America's leading new media firms for anyone who's looking at trying to revitalize their web presence. They're just across the street, and you can find them on the web, but certainly they do remarkable work. They're growing very rapidly, as they should, for the work that Joe did during the campaign. So welcome, Joe. Thank you very much for being here. And we're just going to have a conversation, and we'll talk for a little bit, and then we'll open it up for questions. And unfortunately, for anyone watching live, we don't yet have the ability for you to shepherd in your questions in here, but that will come soon, so I apologize for that. So Joe, I guess I just want to start by saying, looking back at, Joe, for those of you who don't know, and I didn't say this, was also involved in the Dean campaign in 2003, which really was sort of began to show what was possible with this technology, and certainly the Obama campaign has taken it to a whole nother level. I mean, just start with some just basic impressions. You just went through this remarkable life experience. You guys have upended politics, helped elect a a Democrat with 53% of the vote, something we haven't seen since the 1960s. You've created a game-changing now application and model for how politics is going to operate in the 21st century, both domestically here and around the world. I mean, what do you think? Give us some thoughts about looking back on it all.
I mean, looking at the trajectory over a period of years, I think what's interesting is the moment right now, which is, if you think about it, a sort of high watermark in civic life. As people engage through technology but really engage with each other personally. We saw a lot of, anecdotally on the campaign, people meeting their neighbors for the first time through the events that were happening locally. By distributing the power down to the grassroots folks in such a broad effort as a campaign, people were coming together with a sense of common mission in their communities in ways that I don't think they had been as empowered to do in the political process before. And so that obviously had a huge impact on Election Day, but I think what's interesting for organizations and nonprofits and advocacy groups and unions and all these folks is to think about that right now we are at a high watermark of civic engagement in the political process, that right now there are more people who have voted in a presidential election than ever before. There are more people who have had a meaningful relationship with a campaign organization and a candidate via email than ever before. There are more people who've made a political donation of $5, $10, $20 than ever before. And that's a really interesting landscape for, I think, not just the campaign's successor entity Organizing for America, but also for candidates and for grassroots folks themselves who are running for mayor and city council and things like that to look at. Because I think it's a moment of incredible opportunity and promise for civic life. And that was...
So is it a high water mark, or is this the beginning of a whole new way?
Hopefully it's the beginning of something, because as campaigns become more bottom-up, as organizations become more people-focused, as they realize that it's not the people in the conference room that matter, it's the people that are out there who get the email or who are organizing on the ground that matter. I think there's an overall sort of improvement in the civic life in this country and around the world as folks are doing it. And it's a special thing. And so the more organizations, more campaigns are sort of following that philosophy, which comes from Barack Obama himself. His background as a community organizer, that was like electricity through the campaign, from the senior staff down to the field organizers and volunteers, that people could come together in a very local unit and have more power together than they would otherwise alone. It's a very special thing, and hopefully it's something that people will continue with.
So in the 20th century, the dominant media construct for politics and advocacy was TV, right? And what TV wanted was to create couch potatoes. And the goal of television, really, if you think about it, was not to create involvement and engagement, but to have you consume a message sitting in your living room with no mechanism to touch and to engage. And it seems like in this new political age that we live in, the barrier to entry for civic engagement has been lowered very dramatically. Campaigns are now 24/7, 365. They're always on, right? I mean, the question is, Joe, do you think that this is now, do we believe that we will see not 4 million donors in a future presidential campaign, and whatever the number is, 10 million plus on the list, but do we think that there's an opportunity to see campaigns in the 21st century with 10, 15, 20 million donors, 30, 40 million people on the list, or is that sort of internet pie in the sky?
I think it's possible. I think it'll take a little while to get there. I think that the things that will determine whether that happens are actually very boring organizational stuff in terms of the resources that could put into the new media side, the technology side, and the ethos actually, from the top, whether it's from a candidate or a campaign manager. But I'm also not one of these guys that thinks it's sort of either or. Like, there are people who, just temperamentally or ideologically don't want to be involved in the political process that much. I mean, we still have about half of people voting, and so I think there's room and innovation to grow on the sort of larger conversation happening with people, just as I think there's room to grow on the sort of number of people instigating the conversation. But I think you need to be able to address both.
So looking back at the campaign, Joe, what was the most surprising thing to you about, other than winning, perhaps, and having the guy be a block away in the White House now with all your friends? But what was the most surprising thing, and perhaps also the most disappointing thing as you look back?
The most surprising thing was that people were so ready to do it, and people, on the very first day. That was the most surprising moment. Was the very, very first day when we launched the site. Around midnight the night before, and sort of people started flooding in. We weren't really expecting that many people to sort of discover it as we were working out the kinks, but we wound up having sort of getting comments on the blog about what was working and not working, and people had a very sort of all hands on deck feel about it. But then the next day when he gave his announcement speech and sort of asked people to come together and do this together, they came, and we had 1,000 grassroots volunteer groups pop up in the first 24 hours in places like Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, but also in Idaho and Virginia and North Carolina and Indiana. And what we saw was that as we went further into the campaign, into the later primaries, where we were sort of putting staff into states no one ever expected that there was going to be a campaign. And even in the general election, when we were competing in states that hadn't been contested in 40 years, that the most active grassroots volunteer groups that we saw in all these states, Virginia, North Carolina, Indiana, were groups that were actually started back on February 10th, February 11th, 2007. And they had gone through, added more leaders and cultivated a larger cadre of people who were really the organizers, but the core construct of these groups and the sort of bottom-up tools that we gave people was still prevailing even at the end of the campaign, and even after an integration with a very sophisticated traditional field operation. I mean, it's, people like to talk a lot about the new media and the technology stuff, but what we actually ran was also the best field organization I've ever seen put together in a campaign, just in the traditional sense. And we layered the digital stuff into that, and also had an organizing strategy for people to get involved in the campaign in the places where our field staff wasn't and couldn't, or they couldn't participate. But the sophistication and the integration with the traditional field folks, the traditional message and media folks, the traditional fundraising was, I think, one of the sort of untold strengths of the campaign. And to the credit of thousands of super professional and passionate field organizers, we managed to deploy a giant campaign staff into places where there already existed a grassroots infrastructure of people who were essentially owning the campaign by themselves for in many cases, a long time before anybody got there. And that those came together so seamlessly and in a drama-free way speaks to the professionalism and enthusiasm of both the staff side and the grassroots side, but also to the sort of sense of common cause that that Barack Obama and his ethos created for folks.
Can you talk for the political hacks among us today who've worked in campaigns that were grown, and the model for that grew up before the internet, or at least the ubiquitous use of the internet now? How did that really work on a day-to-day basis? I mean, traditionally, I worked in the war room in 1992, and one of the great innovations of that time was that Carville and Stephanopoulos forced the entire campaign to come together twice a day. We met at 7 in the morning and 6:30 in the evening, and literally in a room not much bigger than this, the entire campaign met. And what Carville said the first day was, we're going to tell you everything we know, and we're going to share everything we got, and you're going to be as much part of this campaign as I am, as long as there's no leaks. And if there's a leak, then we'll go back to the balkanized way we run campaigns with everybody hiding in their offices and everything else. But it created an incredible sense of, and the war room itself, every department of the campaign was represented there. So it was a way to actually manage and to prevent there from being balkanization that happens in any campaign. You guys took that old model and added this whole new big piece. How did it work, and how did some of the old dogs who'd been through the old model deal with you young guys trying to improve upon the model, I think, that we used before?
I think we just had a really good team with a lot of really good personalities that people were able to sort of mix and figure out the best way to do all of our work together in the most effective way. So, the integration with the field shop is a product of meeting many times a day with John Carson. And he would walk around the campaign with his laptop and come over to see me, or I'd be hunting him down, and we had a whole staff, and Chris Hughes and his organizing, online organizing team, and the way that we had a whole regional desk structure, and Teddy Goff helped lead that to integrate with our state staff and the regional staff, and super tightly. And so making sure that we were as responsive, because we're not doing anything, like new media is not doing anything that's for new media's sake. So it's not like, in the traditional sense, like the finance people can be arguing with the field people because they want to, each one has different ends for the relationship with an end grassroots supporter or donor. And people are often at different purposes. We were, for every conversation we could have with the finance folks, the communications folks, the field folks, our goals are their goals. Like, we don't have any special only new media thing that we were trying to drive. Our metrics were their metrics in terms of volunteers, doors knocked, dollars raised, all that sort of stuff. So it's an easy conversation to have when folks, when you're approaching, saying, like, we're here to help you and to make more people do the things that you're looking for them to do.
And I should note that there is a new restaurant being built next door, and I'm sure that one of my staff is going to run next door and ask them right now to delay the drilling or whatever they're doing for a little bit while Joe gets to speak. Right, Tracy? Is that, yeah, okay. We've had this happen before. It seems like whenever we do an event, the restaurant is doing new improvements next door. Joe, one last question, which is, now that you've had some distance from the campaign, and as you said, I mean, this was sort of an unprecedented, seamless effort. What do you think this means for, future campaigns, future advocacy efforts, future, even there are companies represented in the room that have many, millions of customers, right, that they've never really tapped into in the way that you guys, I know when I talk to corporate folks, they always say, well, you guys in politics, we're so much ahead of the curve in marketing. You've been able to tap into and integrate the passion of everyday people into your enterprise in the way that most companies would be, have only just begun to think about. I mean, what is your sense about how, given the way that eyeballs, people are consuming media very differently now, right? We've seen huge change in TV. We've seen the rise of mobile. We've seen the continued march of broadband, creating a very different media environment. Project out next 5, 10 years. How do you think, is this bottom-up style now, is this the next wave after broadcast, which, is this post-couch potato, or is this going to be just one of the options we have going forward?
I mean, I think that the organizations and campaigns and advocacy groups and whatever that are going to be effective are going to do all of these things in the most innovative way. And even just within broadcast, like, I'm not the guy on that stuff at all, but making sure that's more targeted and segmented, all that sort of stuff. There's innovation within each of these buckets that can be done, and it's doing all of those things well that I think is the key. So it's not, there's a lot of organizations we'll go talk to, and they're agonizing over, like, well, should we keep doing our traditional, field stuff, or should we just have all this online stuff be the thing? It's like, you're probably screwed either way. That's not really what you should be thinking about. It's about how to layer in the digital piece to the traditional stuff, as well as create other opportunities for where your traditional operation isn't reaching. And so doing both and doing them better is sort of the answer.
So what you're saying is that managing any enterprise like this going forward is going to be hard.
Yeah, and it's hard, but also there's the website and the internet stuff can't be somebody's cousin in the basement in college or something like that. Like, there was I was senior staff on the campaign, and I could argue with the finance director and the communications director and the field director, and sort of have to be able to bargain all of that stuff out. And I didn't get my way all the time, they didn't get their way all the time, but with strong and smart leadership at the top from David Plouffe and others, we were able to sort of come to bargains and strategies and tactics that wound up making the efforts of all these different pieces greater than the sum of their parts. And so things like Dinner with Barack, is a fundraising campaign, but also a message opportunity to show an authentic side of the candidate. It is also a list building opportunity for folks who don't make the donation or just give $5 who wouldn't otherwise, and then they become leads for everything else. So it's it's finding the sweet spots of sort of marketing campaigns and interesting initiatives that can tap on all three of these through the digital space, because at the end of the day, the person on the end of the email or on the end of the phone or on the end of the website doesn't care how your organization is structured, that the finance people are siloed from the field people, and that they're not even talking to each other about the communications that they're sending out to each other. And you still have, even on our campaign, you have the people sending out these PDF invitations for finance events, all this sort of stuff, and you try to wrangle it. But for what we tried to bring was a focus on the end user relationship. So the inbox is a competitive place. So your email's in there, above the email from somebody's spouse and below the email from their boss, and if they've got 5 minutes to give you to read the thing, what's the most important thing, and how do you reflect all of what's going on with the campaign, whether it's the message or the things that you need from them. And so you've got to have a sort of digital component where there's a seat at the table for somebody to be sort of trying to integrate that, and either at the top level or as part of the sort of senior team conversation. I think that's pretty indispensable moving forward.
So one last question, then we'll open it up, is so the Obama campaign built upon some of the models and sort of insight that the Dean campaign had, on which you worked on in 2003, and really took it to a whole nother level. How is some of this understanding going to impact what we should understand about Obama's governance, and how he's going to is Obama going to reinvent the government of the United States the way that he reinvented politics, do you think?
Well, I think there's a new team in the White House now, a new media team, and my deputy from the campaign and former Blue State Digital guy, Macon Phillips, is in charge of it. And obviously, governing is a much bigger challenge, but also a very different challenge by nature. So, a lot of our thinking was about how to engage the supporters to become, more active parts of the organizational aspect of what we were doing. In addition to talking to likely voters and whatnot. Whereas the governing challenge is, he's the president of all the people, and how to layer in the transparency and the communication and the participation aspects for everybody to participate, not just the sort of close-in folks who you can mobilize to help make a point or do what you're doing. And there's a growing team and some folks from the campaign, but also from Google and from the design world, and a lot of interesting folks have joined up, and Vivek starting as the CIO from DC. I think there's a lot of potential and interesting stuff, but there's also, it's a big government, so I think what to look for is sort of the case studies, and look for the leadership from the White House, but also in places like the FCC, where Julius Janikowski, who is a big friend of our shop on the campaign, will be able to do interesting things. And just meeting people in DC, the sort of the people in the bureaucracy who do this stuff, they're having a hard time for a long time, but they have a little bit more spring in their step now because of the way we got here. And so hopefully that's something that is creating more initiative and more proactive ideas to make examples how to do government well, because then that'll trickle out.
I keep thinking that in the weekly cabinet meeting, you're going to start to see the DHS director and the HHS director competing, saying, hey, how many views did you get on your YouTube video this weekend, and how many comments on your blog post from the other day? I think there's going to be not just, there's going to be competition. If you want to give the shiny apple to the teacher, I mean, one of the ways they're going to do that with the president is to show that they're using these tools in innovative ways to reach their constituencies. And I think you're going to see, once this thing gets settled and they're actually people confirmed and running the government in the next few months, I think you're going to see an explosion of experimentation. Yeah. And there's going to be real competition. I mean, and some of the cabinet secretaries understand this stuff very, very well, and I think have real opportunities to bring government closer to people, and certainly that seems to be, part of the mandate of the campaign.
Yeah, that's a big difference from 4 years ago. Coming here in 2004 after the Dean campaign, like we went and had to talk with the Democratic senators, and to see Sherrod Brown talking about how he's on Barbara Boxer's email list, and they're sort of comparing notes about who sent what their email programs look like and things like that. That wasn't really the case 4 years ago, and I think whether it's the cabinet or other political leadership, it's good. But it's also important to note that it's not just this stuff isn't just about the sort of communications or public diplomacy side of governing. It's also how do we use the digital media tactics, technologies to better govern and better do the things that the government is doing. So it's not just like how cool is the embassy website, for instance, in the State Department. It's also what's the digital strategy for counterterrorism, and figuring out how to leverage these tactics and tools to actually do the governing side in ways that maybe aren't just communications oriented. And I think that's one of the most exciting opportunities out there.